Hello, welcome to the Ghosts of Harrenhal. My name's Simon.
And I'm McKelly.
Thank you for joining us for episode 47 of our chapter-by-chapter book review of A Song of Ice and Fire by George Martin. Today, we're discussing chapter 46 of A Game of Thrones. That's Dany 5.
As always, we'll chat about the chapter and try not to spoil any future plot points for you, and hopefully we'll provide you with some entertainment along the way.
We'll summarise what's happened, discuss our thoughts on it, provide some useful background, compare it to the TV show, indulge in a little pedantry, and cover some reader mail. Be sure to check out the show notes, they'll provide you some additional information about the characters and places, other things of note in this chapter.
That it will.
Alright, how you doing?
I'm alright. How about you?
How was your vacation? Oh, I'm fine.
I am relaxed and, well, ready for another week's vacation, basically.
Yeah.
I remember we were sitting there Sunday night watching TV, and I was like, oh man, do we have to go back to work tomorrow? Can't we just disappear for another week? So
I've got news. I think you remember that I was in the process of getting American citizenship.
Yes, do tell.
Well, all of that was put on hold by the coronavirus, but
right.
With the absolutely chaotic and random reopening of things in the United States, I'm back on track. And
all right.
In a couple of weeks' time, I'll be having my interview where they will test me on US civics.
Okay.
And my ability to speak English as well.
Well, you're going to practice up on that?
Well, only on the US civics, thank you. They've given me a study guide, but I don't agree with some of the answers. But my wife is like, no, you don't take that up with them. This is not the forum to get into a fight about what you think of the country.
They ask you a question, and you're like, do you want the answer I'm supposed to give you, or do you want my honest opinion? It's like going on a job interview. Do you want the interview answer to this question or my honest answer to what my two weaknesses are?
My biggest weakness is, in fact, a strength.
That's right.
I'm too much of a perfectionist.
Who doesn't give that answer? Seriously.
All right, well, let's get down to business with a quick recap of what Dany was up to last time we saw her. Last we saw Daenerys, she was in Vaes Dothrak to meet the Dosh Khaleen. She had had a major dust-up with her brother Viserys when he mistook her invite to dinner as her giving him a command. The gifts of the Dothraki clothing she tried to give him only further enraged him. It ended with her hitting him in the head with a heavy medallion. Why don't we give them the summary?
All right. So Daenerys takes part in a Dothraki pregnancy ritual, which involves eating the raw heart of a horse. Yes, you heard me right. Pretty revolting. She's been practicing for days to not throw up, and starving herself for a day and a half to be hungry enough to eat it. Still, quite the meal, and she has to really focus on not vomiting, so she has a lot going on here. Meanwhile, Khal Drogo's watching the feat with what she perceives as love and pride.
With the successful final bite, the Dosh Khaleen render their verdict. Her unborn son will be a boy, will be the prophesied stallion that mounts the world, the Khal of Khals, who will join all the Dothraki in one mighty Khalasar. Dany announces that her son will be named Rhaego.
The next part of the ceremony is a ritual cleansing. She is covered in horse blood, so, I guess it makes sense. It's in the lake that the Dothraki call the womb of the world. And on the walk to the lake, Dany explains to Drogo that the name is in honor of her brother Rhaegar, which Drogo approves. Later, Khal Drogo's love manifests itself when Dany is naked, and they do it right there in front of everyone.
I say. So next is a feast for 5,000 people in Drogo's tent hall. A couple of other Khals get pride of place, but Dany notes that Jorah Mormont has an honourable spot. She cannot see her brother. She calls Jorah over, and he explains that Viserys has gone to buy wine, as he hasn't yet warmed to the fermented, clotted horse milk that the Dothraki favour. I might be with Viserys on this one.
Rarely do I agree with him, but I think I have to as well. Mormont reveals that he caught Viserys trying to steal Dany's eggs to buy an army to take back to Westeros. He deterred the theft by threatening to cut off the hand of the king, if you will. Dany can't understand. She says she would have given Viserys the eggs if he had just asked. At this point, Viserys enters, drunk, incensed that The feast began in his absence. Despite Jorah's attempts to intercept, he tries to sit at the highest table, but Drogo tells him that he belongs at the lowest table with the dregs.
Viserys then redraws his sword and threatens Dany. With his point to her belly, he threatens to cut Rhaego out of her. Jiki is too terrified to translate for Khal Drogo, but Dany calmly does so. When Drogo understands Viserys, the Khal announces that he will have a golden crown that men shall tremble to behold. Viserys is mollified and says that was all he ever wanted. Dany understands the truth of Drogo's intent, and her brother's smile breaks her heart. Drogo's blood riders hold Viserys down, while Drogo dumps his golden medallions into a cooking pot. When the gold melts, he dumps it onto Viserys' head, saying, in the common tongue, "Crown for a caught king." Since no drop of blood was spilled, no Dothraki rules are broken. Dany observes placidly that Viserys was no dragon, as fire cannot hurt a dragon.
She makes a solid point.
True. So, because you've been away, it's been a while since we've recorded, and it's almost... I have a temptation to have forgotten the fact that when we last left it, we were at absolute boiling point in King's Landing.
Right.
It feels like we've been wrenched away to come here.
It does. It really does.
What have you done, George Martin? But then he doubles down by Viserys getting his well-earned comeuppance.
That's right, yeah. So it seemed like we were taking a break from the action, but instead we got action of a different sort here.
Exactly, yeah.
But you're right, yeah, it was a tough time to cut away, so.
Yeah. So breaking it all down, so Dany has to eat the freshly removed stallion heart. The corpse of the horse is lying still there. Presumably the horse did die in this operation.
You'd think so. You'd think that's a high probability there.
She's the centre of attention. I mean, like, nothing else is going on in the room. The horse is slowly festering. The only thing going on in this room is her, this big heart, and he's eating it, and she's eating it, and the whole emphasis here is on whether she can eat it. If she can eat it, the portents for her unborn child are good. If she fails or throws up or whatever, then the portents are bad.
Yeah. And she's chanting to herself, "I am the blood of the dragon. I am the blood of the dragon," to help herself get through it. And yeah, if she consumes the whole heart, it means her son will be swift, strong, and fearless. If she chokes or vomits, that it means that her child could be stillborn, weak, deformed, or possibly female. So, I tell you.
Yeah.
So obviously, they're not exactly very woke, as you'd expect for a tribe of savages, especially one that puts so much emphasis on strength, speed, etc. However, they all bow to the word of the Dosh Khaleen, which is kind of an odd paradox, because Dosh Khaleen are all female. So
Dany prepped herself for this because no one's going to eat a horse's heart straight off the bat without some practice.
Now you got to work for that one.
Yeah. Drinking bowls of blood to prep for the taste and chewing strips of horse jerky to toughen up her jaws, and then not eating for a day and a half, so she's really hungry.
Yeah,
Still,
and because they're in Vase Dothrak, she can't even have cutlery because there's no steel allowed. So she's literally chewing and ripping with her teeth and nails this heart apart. And then it says she's like whirring it with her teeth to. It's quite a rather gross scene, actually.
Yeah. As she finishes, she notices glimpses of pride on Khal Drogo's inscrutable face, and she herself turns to the Dosh Khaleen and says, "Kalaka dothrai mrana," which means a prince rides inside me.
Well said. Very well said. Your Dothraki is coming along much better than your American.
I didn't actually check the pronunciation guide on that one, so I'm sure I'll get corrected.
Yeah, this whole thing is taking place in a deep pit with what they describe as high chalk walls, so I guess this must be the place for such a thing. But the oldest of the crones of the Dosh Khaleen is a one-eyed crone. She closes her said eye so that she can better see into the future. And at that time, Drogo puts his arm on Dany, and she can feel the tension in him. And she thinks even the mighty Drogo fears when the Dosh Khaleen look into the future like this.
The crone announces that he'll be swift as the wind. He'll ride as swift as the wind. Behind him as Khalasar will cover the earth. Men without number. Fierce as storm the prince will be. Enemies will tremble before him. Their wives weep tears of blood. The milkmen in stone tents will fear his name.
Yeah. Sounds pretty intense.
Yeah, it's going to... hearing that, you'd have to think, if Viserys heard that, we know that Viserys was not present for this, right?
Right, yeah.
That would actually be encouraging to him to hear that. That he, they're talking about his nephew.
Right.
But he might be the forerunner to that. He might be the king that, they're not saying that the same won't be true of Viserys.
True, yeah. Maybe he'd think he's going to pave the way for all this to be true. He wouldn't. But he doesn't think that. So, yeah. So they refer to the milkmen in the stone tents. Clearly, they're talking about, I'm guessing, the folks either just in the Free Cities or the Free Cities and Essos. The Free Cities and Westeros. Both have stone, you could say stone tents. Both have walls and castles made of stone.
Yeah.
But then the old crone looks at Dany, and the description says she looks at her almost like she's afraid, and says, "The prince is riding, and he shall be the stallion who mounts the world." When the crowd goes crazy and they're chanting, "The stallion who mounts the world." All kinds of chaos like that.
Yeah. So Dany names the unborn son Rhaegal, and Drogo asks about the name. Dany explains that her brother was a fierce warrior, the last dragon, and his name was Rhaegar, and so it's a derivative of that.
And he tries to pronounce her name. He says, "Is good name, Daenerys' wife." And when I first read it, I was like, who's Daenerys? Dan, we haven't heard anybody named Daenerys. Is that a Dothraki saying? But no, it turns out she's been teaching him a little bit of the common tongue, so...
Yeah, actually, that was a pretty good conversation. I mean, they've only been together a few months, and that wasn't bad. I mean...
Yeah, not too bad. Although she mentions, she doesn't mention, but she thinks it here, that his accent is so thick that both Viserys and Ser Jorah can't understand a thing he says. So, but making progress.
On a conference call today, I got a little bit of a Chinese lesson for our 50th episode.
Yeah,
I'm going to speak some Chinese on our 50th episode, so I got a little bit of bit of practice there.
Yeah.
So the procession heads to the next venue, which is the Womb of the World, which is a lake at the centre of Vaes Dothrak. Dany thinks about the Dosh Khaleen a little bit. They are widowed Khaleesi's. And she does think about, if Khal Drogo were to die, would she end up here? I mean, the answer is yes. This is where they go. So.
Yep. When a Khal dies, and a new one is, rises from the ranks, and then that Khal has a new Khaleesi, the previous Khaleesi is sent to the Dosh Khaleen. So she's gonna be. She says, it's unnerving a little bit that she will someday be sent here, whether she wants to or not. And that's just the way it goes. Those are the rules, I guess.
But we've talked about this before, that the Blood Riders, they die with their Khal or after avenging him.
Yeah.
So they have very good reason to keep him alive. So does Dany. I mean, this doesn't look like the best retirement home. Certainly not for a 14-year-old.
That's a good point. That is a very solid point. Yeah. I mean, they're kind of like genies. Do you remember in Aladdin when Genie was talking about how he has all this cosmic strength and power, but very cramped living spaces because he has to live inside the bottle. So they rule. I've never
seen that film. So.
Was that?
I've never seen that film.
Oh well. It's a funny scene.
Yeah,
Robin
Williams. It makes sense. I get the joke. He's in a lamp, yeah.
They rule over the entire Dothraki nation. Even the mightiest cowls bow to their wisdom and the authority of the Dosh Khaleen. But they do have to live in this one little kind of place for the rest of their lives. So
very good point. Well done. Good analogy there. But I do wonder though. I've noticed. I mean, not to dispel the potential that the Dosh Khaleen can really see the future, but my experience of people who claim to see the future is they often say what the person wants to hear.
Yeah, it does tend
so
to
when
work.
Khal Drogo comes knocking and says, "What's my unborn child going to be?" They're like, "Oh, he's going to be quite something."
What exactly do you want him to be? Swift and strong?
Yeah. He's going to like flowers and art projects.
Have you met Samwell Tarly? He's going to be the spitting image of Samwell Tarly.
So they arrive at the lake to cleanse because she is covered in blood.
Yeah.
The story goes that the first man emerged from the womb of the world 10,000 years ago riding a horse. Because Daenerys is basically Dothraki these days, she just strips naked and wanders out there into the bottomless lake, but she notices that she's standing on the bottom. So I guess it could be bottomless towards the middle.
Right. Not the first step. They don't say the first step's a doozy.
Whoa! Surprising drop-off. So she gets clean, comes back out, and then Khal Drogo likes what he sees, and they do the business right there in front of everyone. Then they mount up. Oh, sorry. Then they get on their horses and they ride back to his camp.
To the hall. They go to the hall.
To his hall.
His hall.
Right, yeah.
His big banquet hall, I guess. And so as Dany and the procession arrive to the thunderous shouts and chants of the stallion that mounts the world, the tent is open, the roof of the hall is open because the Dothraki believe that everything important has to happen under an open sky, and it's kind of a similar chaos and merriment to their wedding day, aside from the fact that unlike their wedding day, there will be no swordplay and bloodshed. If you remember back on our wedding day, I believe there were 12 deaths. So there shouldn't be any deaths today.
Yeah.
I'm not sure it quite goes that way, but there shouldn't be any.
So there's a real hierarchy to the seating arrangements. The further you are from Khal Drogo, the lower you are in the estimation. He's at the high table with two other Khals, Khal Jomo and Khal Ogo, who were at the ceremony. I wonder what they think. I mean, they themselves are Khals, and they have sons. I wonder if they're like...
She said the same thing about Ogo. Fogo, I think, is Ogo's son. She said the same thing about Fogo just a few years ago.
But then further from that table, you sort of like move into sort of like the Blood Riders and then sort of like lesser lieutenants. And the furthest from him are the cripples and the
young boys and the old
boys,
men and all that jazz.
Dany looks all around for Viserys. Should be easy to spot because he's the only long blonde-haired person there. But there's no sign of him.
With, as she puts it, beggar's rags.
Yeah.
But usually he's up for ruining her good time. You remember he ruined her time when she got silver. And when he ruined her time when she asked for time by herself to go into the sea, Dothraki Sea, and she tried to give him those gifts, and he ruined that. So you can almost feel that he's off preparing to ruin this good time for her. Like he's getting all his plans together. How am I going to ruin this one?
Which makes you wonder why she's looking for him. But I guess on the one hand, she is a 14-year-old who's just had like really good news. She just aced her tests,
right?
And she wants to show off to Big Brother,
Right? Yeah.
You should hear what my baby's gonna be.
So, but instead of Viserys, she can't find Viserys, despite looking all around and him should stand out she sees Ser Jorah instead. He's at the center of the hall in a place of respect, because I think Simon mentioned this in the summary. The Dothraki really they put his sword play in high regard, so he's in a very respectable spot. And she sends Jiqui over there to invite him to come sit with her, and of course he comes right over and sits, and she asks, "Where is Viserys?" And he says Viserys went to the Western Market looking for wine, because as Dany knows, Viserys is not much of a fan of the fermented mare's milk.
Yep. Yeah.
And,
just coming back to the place of respect for Jorah, it is interesting that he is swallowing that. So she said around the middle of the hall. So if there's 5,000 people there, there's a couple of thousand people with places of higher respect than Jorah in that hall. He was a Lord of Westeros. True. A minor lord, but he was a Lord of Westeros. At any assembly of 5,000 people in Westeros, he would expect a higher place than that, unless it was like the king and queen and all the high lords.
Right.
He would expect to be closer to the top than that. So he is swallowing some pride to be where he is. I mean, but I guess he understands Dothraki custom and so doesn't take the slide, you know.
Yeah. He gets it. He's not Dothraki, so probably happy to accept his spot in the middle of the pack.
Yeah.
But turns out that Viserys has been frequenting the Western Market to drink with the traders there. He's become like the norm of the Western Market. For those who aren't familiar with Norm, he's a character on Cheers. I don't know. I figure everybody knows about Cheers.
When I saw Norm in the notes, I thought you meant like the normal. He was doing his normal things. I didn't realize that's what you meant.
No, when he walks into the Western Market, they all go, "Viserys,
Viserys." Yes. I have a story about that.
Yeah.
When I moved to North Carolina, I met Carson that week, and a couple of months later, I took her up to upstate New York, to where I'd previously lived. And we went to a bar, and I went to the bar a few times. It was a nice place.
Yeah.
And we were quite young, we were in our 20s. So you get, in the States, you have to show ID to go into a bar. Yeah, I mean, they're pretty strict about that kind of thing. And when I got to the door, Carson showed her ID, and the bouncer said, "Come on in," to me, as if I'd been there like a million times. I was like,
"Hey, buddy, Simon."
I don't remember any of those times. Maybe that's cause and effect.
Right, I was just going to say that. But apparently, she thinks that he prefers the company of the traders in the Western Market to her company these days, which, I was thinking about that. That could be due to the fact that it could be hard for him to see her rise to such an elevated status here in this Dothraki tribe, especially as long as they've been together. It's got to have been, I don't know, weeks, if not months, that they've been together.
But I also think he must be lonely. I mean, because nobody speaks the common tongue. He's on the outs with Jorah and Daenerys. Yeah. So he's just surrounded by people with whom he has nothing in common, can't speak to them. The traders, at least, would have some common tongue, so he could go there and get drunk with them and at least have a chat.
Yeah, and maybe, because he's not going to be shy about the fact that he's Viserys Targaryen, King of Westeros. Yeah. Maybe a few of them will show him some deference to the fact that he's King of Westeros, at least to his face.
And Jorah tells her that he's trying to buy sellswords, and she's like, "But is that safe? I mean, he doesn't have any money." If you buy a sellsword and don't pay them, they still have a sword.
Right. It's now just a sword.
Exactly.
It's not a bought sword.
Right. And they're not as hidebound by Dothraki tradition. Like, no swords in Vaes Dothrak.
Yeah.
So Jorah explains that he's going to pay for them by selling her eggs. He tried to steal them. But until Jorah threatened to cut his hand off, Dany is shocked and confused. They're her eggs, and they're just made of stone. They couldn't possibly pay for anything. And Jorah says, well, diamonds and sapphires are just stones, but they're worth a lot.
And
Similar
these
to
are a lot
dragon's eggs.
more rare than diamonds and sapphires. And he says the traders that Viserys has been dealing with would, as he puts it, sell their manhood for one of those stones. And that if he sold all three, he could basically buy a sellsword army to take to Westeros. And
Dany says that he doesn't have to steal them. He's both her brother and her king.
yeah,
He just has to ask, which is so sweet of her. So undeserving of him.
everything about her is...
Should anything befall him in the next few pages, I won't care.
That sounds almost prophetic. But this line here made me wonder, if Viserys knew this ahead of time, if Moppatus let on at all that he had these eggs, couldn't he have just gone that route rather than the whole Khal Drogo plan? Just bought an army, like bought the Golden Company for a while or something, bought one of the many sellsword armies in Essos, rather than this whole elaborate plan of marrying her off to Khal Drogo to get a Dothraki Screamer army. Maybe he'd prefer, maybe he wouldn't be able to get as many as he needs, or maybe they're not as formidable as a Dothraki Screamer army, but it sure seems like an easier option.
That is a fascinating thought. Now, we have reason to question Illyrio Moppatus' thing. I have an idea. I have a thought for you on this. And this is not in the notes. You just came up with this and threw it out at me. So this is a spontaneous response. Remember that, so Illyrio Moppatus lives in Pentos, right?
Yeah.
Pentos is one of the places where they give the Khals places to live rather than fight them.
Right, yes.
It might be nice for Illyrio Moppatus if the Khalasars all went across to Westeros and left Essos alone.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Essos becomes a much more peaceful place without these lunatics.
Sure, and they don't have to bribe them. I mean, there are other Khalasars that you'd have to deal with, but this is a huge Khalasar. And he's not necessarily going to get the whole Khalasar. But still, even if you ship 10,000 Dothraki Screamers off to Westeros.
But maybe he saw the big picture. Maybe he saw Khal Drogo's going to fall in love with this girl. And he's not going to send a branch of his army off there. He's going to take the whole Khalasar over there, take Westeros, and give his wife the throne.
Yeah. Good
and
thinking.
Stay there, away from me. Because I don't like him and his horsey smell.
So ultimately, you're thinking that Viserys was not aware of these dragon eggs as a pending marital gift to Daenerys.
Oh, yes.
Because Viserys wouldn't care that these Dothraki are a thorn in the sides of Pentashi magisters. He would just want the army to go get his throne back.
Yeah. I assume he didn't know, but you've got to say, I have to say, it would be better for the Targaryens to have the dragon eggs when they take the throne back, because it's kind of like a status symbol,
Right, yes.
We are the dragons. Here are dragon eggs to prove it.
Yeah.
Okay, we digress.
Yes, just a little.
Yeah, so Daenerys said, Viserys is her brother and the true king, and Jorah agrees he is her brother. That's
the part he agrees with. He says, yep, he's your brother. I'll give you that much. He is quite open in his defiance of his king that he is a sworn sword to. So
yes,
I think
he has to be a little bit careful. He's burned bridges on the other side of the narrow sea.
Yeah, that didn't work out so well either. So it's quite apparent at this point. Viserys, he is sworn to Viserys only because he's sworn to Dany, which we also know that he's also spying for Robert, for Lord Varys and Robert Baratheon. So he's got a lot of tentacles going out here. But you get the idea that Viserys is like the bottom of his totem pole of people he has allegiance to.
Yeah, or maybe, I mean, a couple of times I've voiced that I think Jorah Mormont is keeping back from Viserys information that could help Viserys to fit in better here.
Oh, you have mentioned that before, yeah.
And maybe he's doing that on purpose to Viserys' doom. He's actually trying to get Viserys killed by not telling him the things he should be telling him if he was truly loyal to him.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about that. Interesting idea.
Perhaps that's partly because he's on the payroll of King Robert, but also partly because he's clearly become very fond of Daenerys.
Yeah.
So it's the two things, intersect for him.
Although I think he has tried to explain things to Viserys. I just don't think Viserys cares to listen.
That's true, yeah.
But Dany finally voices what we've all assumed as the attachment to a monster like her brother Viserys. She explains, my mother died in giving birth to me. My father and brother both died before I was born. I wouldn't even know their names if not for him. He's all that I have and that I've ever had. So, yeah. But as Jorah points out, that's no longer the case.
Right, yeah. She is the Khaleesi of a huge Khalasar where she's loved and respected.
Yeah. You can get... despite the whole rise to Khaleesi, her whole life, Viserys is all she's ever had. So you can get the lingering feeling of attachment to him, kind of for her whole life, apart from these past few months, she's only ever had him. So it would take a little while, you would imagine, to totally realize, oh, this guy is a clown.
Yeah.
And he's been telling her since she was a child that she is nothing without him. You have to assume someone like him has been saying that. We've heard him say it a few times. So that she's fortunate to have him around, and that kind of abuse and that kind of mental... she's been told this over and over again her entire life. So it's basically her way of thinking is that she is nothing without Viserys, and that she's so lucky to have Viserys around.
Yeah. And so Daenerys, so Jorah wasn't at the ceremony, so he doesn't know what came of it. She explains to him that her son is destined to be the Khal of Khals, who will unite all the Khalasars and conquer the world. And she's named him Rhaego, and Jorah says that's a name to make the usurper's blood run cold. He's right about that.
Yeah, and Jorah explains, Viserys is no longer everything to you anymore. You're now part of the Dothraki, and beyond that, in your womb is the stallion that mounts the world. And she's been confused by this term. She's heard them chanting it to her, but she doesn't really know what it means. And he explains that, like Simon said.
Oh, that's right. He explains to her what it means. That's right. What she was told was just that he's the stallion that mounts the world. Yeah. It's Jorah that explains to Daenerys what that means.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, like you said in the summary, he's the Khal of Khals. He's going to unite all Khalasars and conquer the world. So, no pressure, Rhaego. It's hard enough to be like the child of a famous professional athlete, let alone the child who's been told who everyone expects to be the Khal of Khals to unite the whole world under him. So Dany's response is basically the only response you could have in that situation is, oh, I named him Rhaego. What else is she supposed to say? Okay, that's good to know. We'll see how that plays out.
So at this juncture, Viserys shows up drunk with his sword on his hip, and she says that he's found wine or something that passes for courage anyway.
Yeah. So the way she refers to him from here on for the rest of this chapter is very different from the way she's referred to him even just a few paragraphs ago when she was saying he's my true king and he's my brother and he's the only one that's ever been there for me. From here on out, like this comment, something that, him having something that passes for courage. From here on out, she starts referring to him in a very different way. And it's almost like she's she finally either sees him clearly for the first time, or maybe she's starting to mentally separate herself from him because she can see disaster impending here. I'm not sure, but she does send Jorah straight away to try and rein Viserys in before disaster ensues, because Viserys has a sword belt strapped to his hip with the sword in it. And his lack of embracing the Dothraki culture might seriously come to a head here, as we know it does, because he clearly doesn't understand the rules well enough, or doesn't care enough about the rules to heed them properly.
So Viserys shouts for his sister. All three of the Khals laugh at him, and this makes him turn to the high bench, and Viserys demands a place with them. Yeah. But Drogo points to the lowest place where he wants him. Viserys says that's no place for a king, and Drogo said, in common tongue, right? He said, place for Sorefoot King.
Yes.
Which is one of the things they called him after he walked, was the Sorefoot King.
Yes.
So...
and then he says, bring the cart for Khal Raggett, which is the cart king. Because you remember, that's like the lowest of the low at Dothraki, those who can't ride. And not only those who can't ride, but those who are carried in carts are even the very bottom. And remember earlier, he rode in the cart, so they call him Khal Raggett.
So the whole place falls about laughing. Jorah and Viserys grapple. Viserys is knocked to the floor, draws his sword, which of course we know is the absolute no-no.
No.
Dany cries out in terror. She knows what the drawn sword means.
Yeah.
And this, finally, Viserys sees her. He slashes his sword to make a path to her, although nobody actually tries to stop him.
Yeah.
She pleads with him to put the sword away. She tells him he can have the dragon eggs.
And Jorah says, do as she says, fool, before we're all killed. So again, not exactly knowing his place when it comes to being the sworn sword of a theoretical king here. But she also comments on the borrowed sword. She refers to it as the borrowed sword that Magister Illyrio gave Viserys to make him look more kingly. And if you remember way back in Dany 1, multiple times she referred to the sword as his borrowed sword, which I think is kind of signifying just how he's a beggar king. Everything about him is borrowed. Everything about him is not legitimate. Although technically he is the legitimate king of Westeros, but
Right, yeah, true. Yeah.
Aside from that, everything about him is borrowed.
Yeah. Viserys, probably because of the drink, thinks that they won't actually kill him because no bloodshed is allowed, but we heard earlier that, for instance, eunuchs strangle people with silks and things like that within Vaes Dothrak, so it can be done. It's just no bloodshed, so that's the only rule.
And the next thing that Viserys does is, just completely nuts, man. Come on. He takes his sword, he puts the point of it at Dany's pregnant stomach, and says, tell Drogo, I want the crown I was promised. And he says, he bought you, but he hasn't paid for you. Just this lack of comprehension of how this culture works is just so...
And if he doesn't get it, he's taking her back and cutting out the foal and leaving it for Khal Drogo. And this is the point where Jiqui refuses to translate.
Yeah, she says
she reckons. Yeah,
she says if she has to translate to the Khal what Viserys just said, the Khal would drag her behind a horse up the top of the Mother of Mountains. So and you have to assume that although Drogo is learning some common tongue, he can't follow everything that's being said here.
No, so
he will be relying on what Dany tells him. So Dany could try and soften the blow,
right? Because Dany takes over the translation at this point. Yeah,
and we don't know exactly what she says. She doesn't give us what she says, but he says to Dany, "What did the Khal say?" And Dany says, he says, you shall have a splendid golden crown that all men shall tremble to behold. I think you mentioned the summary of this.
So Viserys smiles and lowers his sword because that's what he wanted. That's all he wanted. That's all I ever wanted. And Dany thinks of him as the man who had once been her brother.
Yeah,
So,
that's what I mean by she starts referring to him differently. That's the second time since he showed up that she refers to him as the man who once was my brother or used to be my brother or whatever. So to me, it feels like her knowing that things are about to go real bad for Viserys and mentally distancing herself from him, preparing for him to no longer be in her life. That's how it comes across to me.
Yeah.
And he's also, when he's got the sword at her stomach and stuff, he is weeping and laughing at the same time.
Yeah, that's the drink. When you drink enough wine, you both laugh and cry. It's easy. Happens to all of us. You wouldn't know, but... No, you're right. You had some thoughts on that, and I agree with everything you say. I'm not going to steal your thunder. You take it.
Well, I just thought, we're pretty hard on Viserys because he's a pretty terrible person, but you do have to keep in mind that he was just a small boy when he lost his family, his kingdom, everything about him, and that's got to mess anyone up, So maybe deep down, he's missing his sister and their shared situation, and she's rising up, and he is maybe feeling left behind here, and so he's weeping at the same time he's threatening her because that's his armor, that's what he does, he threatens her. So that's what's going on in this particular scene here.
Yeah. But then the trap on Viserys is sprung, the Blood Riders grab him, break his wrist, held down, the gold is melted in the pot and dumped on his head with the words, he begs for help,
yes.
Calling Dany his sweet sister.
Yeah.
A little bit late.
Yeah, it's not what he referred to her as earlier.
No. When Drogo dumps the melted gold over his head, here's the crown for the Cart King. So,
yeah.
And no blood was spilled, but it certainly killed him. Dany comments to Jorah that he can't have been a dragon because fire couldn't kill a dragon.
That's right, yeah.
So, R.I.P. Viserys Targaryen.
Yes.
You will not be missed.
Not much, anyway.
So, to background, what have you got?
So, being that this is the end of Viserys Targaryen, I wanted to talk a little bit about a concept called Targaryen madness. So, it's a concept, it's basically that there is a trait for insanity in the Targaryen bloodline, and of course, their predisposition for incest doesn't help with the weeding out of that trait very much. So,
rather reinforces, I would feel.
Right. So some of those afflicted show signs early in life, and yes, I'm looking at you, Viserys, while others don't begin to display the insanity until later in life. Case in point, his father, the Mad King Aerys II. Sometimes it's a different kind of trait that can trigger the madness. For instance, the Targaryen prophetic dragon dreams can put stress on the sanity of the dreamer. And also their yearning to bring dragons back to life can do the same as well. For instance, as I think has been mentioned a few times in this podcast, back in 232 AC, Aerion Targaryen died drinking a cup of wildfire, believing it would transform him into a dragon.
He is one of the Targaryen ancestors that I remember.
Yes, I think you brought him up originally.
Yeah, because he's an idiot.
Spoiler alert, it did not work.
No, he was not a true dragon either.
Some of the other Targaryens, aside from the ones that I just mentioned, thought to have picked up the madness trait include King Maegor the Cruel, or Maegor the Misunderstood,
Thank you.
King Baelor the Blessed, who was one of the most beloved kings by the small folk, but also believed to be pretty crazy as well. So
Interesting.
So technically, only Aerys is the only one that's really considered having been truly mad. But those with Targaryen blood have committed many an insane act for one reason or another.
So comparisons with the television show, this is very, very close. The horse heart eating scene is pretty well captured. Viserys and Jorah are present and they witness it all. And actually, they have a conversation in which Viserys mentions, as he sees them all celebrating the fact that she succeeded, and that she's bearing the stallion that mounts the world, he comments to Jorah, "She's really loved," you know. He notices it and sees it for himself. Yeah.
Wow.
And then he departs the scene without Jorah noticing, and I think then he's gone off to go and get drunk because of that. So there's a sort of specific reason for his going to get drunk, the fact that she's loved and he isn't.
Yeah, that goes back to my whole theory that it's got to be weighing on him seeing her rise up while he's left behind.
Yeah.
Especially since she's always been in his shadow.
Yeah. The intermediate scene at the Womb of the World is dropped. We just go from the heart-eating scene to the feast. The feast is very closely captured. I mean, just for costs, there aren't 5,000 people present, but everything else is very, very similar in that. I mean, almost verbatim, in fact. Just a shout out to Emilia Clarke and Jason Momoa here, who are Dany and Khal Drogo, respectively. They both did a really good job in the heart-eating scene. She does a good job of chomping that thing down. I mean, I don't think she actually did, but acting like she did a good job of that. And he does a really good job of being stoic and Khal-like whilst rooting for her and also falling in love with her. It's a subtle piece of acting for such a fantastically talented actor, Mr. Momoa.
That would be a very nuanced thing, because he's trying to convey a lot of different emotions, and he can't say anything. It all has to be with facial expression. Yeah, I get it.
So yeah, that's all nicely captured. Pedantry. You've got some pedantry.
I do. It's just little. I have a couple little things. It's just, so they mention in the chapter a few times that there's 5,000 Dothraki in this hall, including the lowest of the low. But I'm wondering where the other 35,000 members of the Khalasar are.
How interesting. That's a very good point.
Because in the previous Dany chapter, Jorah said to her when they were comparing Westerosi knights versus Dothraki screamers that Khal Drogo has 40,000 mounted warriors in his Khalasar. So I'm just wondering where the other 35,000 went, especially if the lowest of the low made it into the corner of this feast.
So I like your theory that he invited the 4,900 most important members of his Khalasar and the 100 lowest just to insult Viserys.
Right. Yeah. He needed them in there.
Imagine if you were at the next table, you'd be like, "Jeez, is this what he thinks of me?"
Next table over. They're starting to sweat a little bit, like, whew. I thought he liked me. We had that great conversation the other day.
That's like, I always remember the NHL All-Star game where they picked teams.
Oh, yeah.
They had two captains and they picked teams. It's like, the guy who got picked last, he's like, "Hey."
I'm still an All-Star, right?
Yeah, exactly. You're just the worst one.
Yeah.
So my pedantry is about the fact that she eats a horse's heart. I looked this up, and an adult horse's heart, weighs 8 pounds.
That's big.
That's a lot of meat right there. I tried to look if it was humanly possible, and it is. It is humanly possible to eat that much horse flesh, but it would be hard. It would be. I mean, professional eaters would struggle with that kind of thing.
Yeah, it's 128 ounces, so that's a lot.
Nailed it.
That's a lot of quarter pounders right there.
Yeah, I've been to a restaurant in Amarillo, Texas, where if you eat the 72-ounce steak, you get it for free.
Man, Dany could take that down.
Nobody does. I mean, people go in there like, "Hey, I'm going to do it," big fat Texans. And they can't do it because it's just too much food. I mean, and it's like $80. So I mean,
right? It's either paying $80 or you're paying zero, but everybody's paying $80.
Exactly,
not Dany.
But then when I looked at that, we found pictures of this woman doing it.
Oh yeah, right.
She scarfed the thing down and then immediately called for another helping and did it again. and then did it one more time. She ate 3 copies of it. She was a professional eater. That was her job.
Yeah.
But it was extraordinary.
Now, I gotta say, we looked her up. She doesn't look that much bigger than Daenerys. She's a small lady.
Yeah, so it can be done. I just don't think a couple of days of practice is what was required. I think you needed to...
It's true. You gotta make a career out of it.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, it just seems a bit much. And none of that was raw heart meat.
Yes.
Which is just muscle.
Oh, God, could you imagine when you're totally stuffed as much as you possibly could be, and you gotta keep eating this raw horse heart? Oh, there's no way. There's just no way to do it.
Yeah. Yeah. I'd be like, you know what? I want a girl. What can I say? Okay, so news and notes. Please send us your questions for our 50th episode. We've already had a few. That's very exciting.
Yes.
Email us, reach out on social media. We will include it in the show. We've got something a little bit special planned.
We're working on it.
We are working on it, finally.
And you could even send us a voice memo. And how cool would that be? Wouldn't that be fun? If you send us a voice memo, we'll put it on there. We'll put it on the air.
To hear your voices, how exciting would that be?
Right. Just know that if you send us one, we will put it on the air. So make sure you're okay with that before you do it.
Yeah.
But
how obviously, cool would that be? Our huge legal team will get onto that. So, by sending us a voice memo, you're authorizing us to do whatever.
Or something like that.
Yeah.
Speaking of questions, we got a fantastic correspondence from Kate on Instagram.
Yes, thank you, Kate. McKelly told me all about it because I don't know anything about Instagram, but yay! It was very nice of you to say those nice things, Kate.
He asked me yesterday if it was on Instatube.
I was joking.
I know you know Instagram from TikTok. So Kate, that was fantastic. Thank you so much for what you said. It really meant a lot to us, especially the part where you said that you thought we were the best Song of Ice and Fire podcast out there.
Well, so, high praise. It sounds like someone who's listened to more than one.
That's right. And deemed us to be the best. Now, see, this is the kind of thing, you just cut and paste that into a review. Boom.
All right, so let's conclude. Viserys had completely lost touch with reality. McKelly, you don't know, but wine can do that to you. You drink enough. I mean,
he started out a few cards short of the deck, and then I feel like this trek across Essos just tossed all the rest of the cards to the wind. It was like 52 card pickup with this guy.
Especially with dressed like a Westerosi lord the whole time.
Yeah. Which turned into dressing like a beggar, as Danny kept referring to him.
Because he only had one change of clothes.
I'm not really... He did only have one change of clothes. I'm not really sure him dying really changes a whole lot from the political perspective. I mean, everyone who was reading along with us or listening along with us knows he really wasn't going to lead anybody anywhere.
Himself to oblivion.
That was where he was heading. I mean, it's still Dany and or her child who are the real political threat to Robert in his role.
Exactly. So nothing's really changed for Robert.
Yeah.
And Dany finally came to accept it. I mean, that's why she was... I mean, she was pretty stoic all chapter. She was stoic when she was chowing down on Horseheart.
Yes, she was.
She was also stoic when she watched her beloved brother put to death in front of her. And it's because she realised there was just no helping him. He was just beyond redemption. Yeah,
she did everything she could. There was nothing more there that she could do. It was going to happen one way or another. And Dany truly is the last dragon.
Well, before Rhaego was born.
Yes, she's currently the last dragon.
Right.
And Jorah is now the only touchstone to Westeros that she has. So
yeah.
And I wondered, could losing Viserys now cause her to lose interest in reclaiming the Iron Throne for her or her son? I mean, she's Dothraki now. She's embracing the Dothraki culture. They're not predisposed to want to go across the narrow sea and take on Westeros. Maybe she'll lose interest in it.
Yeah, that's a good point. I wonder if the prophecy might spur them to do it, because the prophecy
Maybe.
said they would be, it would cover the world.
That's
So
true.
that prophecy pushes them to go back to Westeros. But I agree. I mean, she's never been happier than she is as Khaleesi of this Khalasar.
Yeah. Right. Exactly. Now, when Rhaego is born, the spitting image of Sam Tarly, they might be like, well, we're pretty content right here in Essos.
Those Dosh Khaleen, they know nothing.
All right. As always, you can reach us at ghost.heronhall@gmail.com. You can follow us on Twitter at @ghostheronhall. Go check us out on Facebook and Instagram, and we are also out on YouTube.
Thanks for listening.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.